feel so welcome here today. Thank you so much, Pastor Jim. This has been fun already. I haven't even started. So I grew up in Illinois, and I actually went to a Foursquare church, but we weren't blessed with an amazing facility like this. We would meet in people's homes. Sometimes we would rent out a local auditorium. One time we actually rented out the local skate ranch. I don't know if you guys know what skate ranch is. It's like the local place where kids go skating. And so we were actually holy rollers, which was great. My goodness. So you guys are in the middle of a really cool series here, and it is called One God, Many Questions. So I was asked to come in and share some perspective, some things that I've learned through the years. And before I do that, can we jump in and pray real quick? All right. Jesus, we thank you so much for the fact that you are the same yesterday, today, and forever. And we thank you that you are the truth, and the truth will set us free. And so we are here today to open our hearts to your truth, Jesus. So be with us. Amen. Amen. So let's jump in. The title is One God, Many Questions, Creation or Evolution. So we're going to answer some questions in regards to Adam and Eve, Noah, dinosaurs, cavemen, giants, and a flat earth versus the other view. So just to let you know, those are the topics we're going to be covering here today. So one God, many questions. Why do a sermon series on questions? Why would we do that? Anybody? What's that? I can hear you talking. Even the angels have questions. See, unanswered questions cause doubt. And doubt kills outreach, right? And our fear wins. See, Jesus said, go and make disciples. So if we're obedient followers of Christ, we need to be making disciples. But the problem is making disciples requires outreach. And unanswered questions cause doubt. And doubt kills outreach. And our fear wins. You guys getting a repetitive downward spiral here? You're picking up on what I'm laying down? All right, see, Hebrews 11:1 says that now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. See, followers of Christ are able to have a confident hope that has been reasonably investigated that gets stronger when tested. So I'd like to welcome everybody here today. If you are a believer, if you are a follower of Christ, this message is for you. If you're here kind of testing out the waters and you're not a follower of Christ yet, this message is for you. Because when you walk into this church, did anybody see a coat check at the front door? No? There wasn't a brain check either. So you don't have to go to church and check your brain at the front door. Okay? Thankfully, we live in Southern California, so we don't have coat checks or brain checks. Where I grew up in Illinois, we had coat checks because it was freezing. That's why I live here. So the reason why I want to make a very distinct point right now is the fact that you can have a confident hope that has been reasonably investigated that gets stronger when tested. And you can keep your logical mind when you're a Christian. Now, here's an easy way to remember that. Christ. Confident hope that's been reasonably investigated that gets stronger when tested. So this is what we're going to be diving into today. So answered questions build hope. And reasonable faith fuels outreach. See, a reasonable faith is like the gas in your car. If you've got a car and you don't have gas in it, it might as well be a chicken coop. It doesn't do anything for you. You know what I'm saying? So that's how it is with our faith. We have to have a reasonable faith in order to put the fuel into what Jesus has called us to do. Our fear loses at that point. See, we have one God and many questions. Should we dive into the questions? I think so. So how did the earth populate after Adam and Eve as well as the flood? Was it by incest? Yuck! I can't believe I have to answer this question. All right, let's define terms. Socrates has been attributed to saying that wisdom begins with the defining of terms. So I like to know what we're talking about before we dive deep. So Webster is a pretty smart guy, and I think a lot of us trust what he has to say about words. So what does Webster have to say about incest? Well, it's sexual intercourse between persons so closely related that they are forbidden by law to marry. Well, Leviticus 18:6 says that no one is to approach any close relative to have sexual relations. I am the Lord. So there is a law against incest. But Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. When did Adam and Eve happen? In the book of Genesis. So technically, there was no law yet, so they weren't breaking the law. After the flood, there was still no law yet, so they weren't breaking any laws. As awkward as it does sound, siblings having to marry still feels weird, even if there is no law attached to that, right? Can we agree? It still feels weird, even though it's not illegal back in Genesis. Why? It's because we're culturally opposed to the idea. Rightly so. There's a yuck factor of being raised together. Nobody wants to marry their brother or their sister because you've been living in the same home, the same parents, sharing all the same stuff, and there's not an attraction there. And then also there's birth defects that can happen. So let's dive into this. Adam and Eve. The siblings had no other options. There was no other options. I mean, can we think of any other options? You get the first two people, they had children, and that next generation needed to reproduce. After the flood, there were options. Siblings may have married, but cousins were also available. See, Noah had 3 sons that also had wives. So the individual sons and their wives could have had children that could have intermarried, or they could have ended up marrying a close cousin. But a couple of generations after that, the next thing you know, you've got a larger population, and there's really no need for marrying cousins or siblings anymore. So what is the motive behind this question? It's to discount Adam and Eve. Because if Adam and Eve are yucky, full of incest, then it's got to be false. Because obviously everything that we don't like is false, right? We don't like taxes, therefore it's false. No. Try that with the government. It doesn't work. I don't like paying taxes, therefore they're false. I denounce them. No, it doesn't work that way. The reason why is because our culture is promoting an idea called evolution. And there's Charles Darwin, right there. Or that's me after too many Red Bulls. I totally degrade. Oh, by the way, this guy is on the front of my book. I wrote a book about evolution, and I decided to not do the original creationist approach. I decided to write a book that refutes evolution with science and doesn't point to the Bible at all. And a lot of Christians don't know that that's possible. Do I believe that the Bible discounts evolution? Yes. But did I want to write a book that atheists would read? Yes. So this book is for people who are skeptics that the second you bring up the Bible, they dismiss you. So I wrote this with only science, no creationist materials, and no scripture. All right, so to promote evolution, that's why people want the yuck factor attached to Adam and Eve. Let's move on. All right, yet, newsflash, an evolutionary worldview also requires siblings to interbreed. So they're trying to give the yuck factor to Adam and Eve, but if you go back to the first humans are going to have siblings interbreed either way. And the reason why we know this is because of the field of genetics. This is, when it comes down to mitochondrial DNA, and the evolutionists like to call this the most recent common ancestor, and the Y-chromosomal most recent common ancestor, excuse me. Now, an easier way to say this in layman's terms is what we call the mitochondrial Eve and the Y-chromosomal Adam. Are you guys ready to get into science class here real quick? Okay, so we all know that we have a nucleus in the cells in our body. Every single cell in your body has a nucleus. So our DNA is held in that nucleus. In that nucleus, we have 3.2 billion base pairs that make up the human genome. But yet we also have another set inside of our mitochondria. And our mitochondria are the little powerhouses that float around inside of the cytoplasm inside of our cells. Now they have their own unique DNA. They have their own genome. Now here's the greatest part about it. Everybody gets an exact copy of their mitochondrial DNA from their mother. Okay, so mitochondrial DNA goes from mother to child. So men, we have our mother's mitochondrial DNA, and women, you have your mother's mitochondrial DNA. Now, the Y-chromosomal DNA is what is part of our sexual chromosomes, right? So women have an XX and men have an XY. So men, we have all received a Y chromosome from our fathers, and it is an exact copy, okay? So as evolutionary biologists and geneticists study the evolutionary worldview, what they have come to find out is that at some point in time, there was a solo woman and a solo man that passed on their mitochondrial DNA and their Y-chromosomal DNA, because all humans, regardless of race, ethnicity, continent, we all have the same mitochondrial DNA. And men have all the same Y-chromosomal DNA. So no matter how you cut the cards, if you're looking at a Adam and Eve worldview, or you're looking at an evolutionary worldview, we all have come from some sort of an Adam and Eve figure, and so siblings had to have married at some point in time. So if an evolutionist says, oh, yuck, you believe in Adam and Eve and all this incest stuff, well, you can say, no, actually, it wasn't incest because it wasn't against the law. And yes, I do believe that there was a true Adam and Eve, and so do geneticists. Okay, moving on. There's some other factors here. Let's talk about birth defects, because that's a real thing. Is anybody familiar with genetic entropy? Is anybody familiar with entropy? Okay, entropy, I'll give you a quick example of what it is. Imagine you have a warm mug of hot water, of tea or coffee, whatever it is. You put an ice cube in there. What happens is you have different levels of energy. So you have a lower amount of energy in the ice because it lacks heat. You have a higher amount of energy in the tea because it has a lot of heat. What's going to happen is what's called entropy, where there's going to be an equalization of dynamic energy. So there's going to be a transfer of energy, and then instead of having a hot liquid and a cold ice cube, you're going to have a lukewarm cup of tea. Does that make sense? So the same thing is happening in our universe, right? The universe started, a lot of energy, a lot of movement, a lot of dynamic things going on, a lot of heat. So we're slowly moving towards a less energetic universe. Someday the universe is going to be over. That's called entropy. Well, believe it or not, the same thing is happening with the human genome. So our genes are actually decreasing every single generation due to mutations. Okay, it says right here in the Journal of Nature that we are mutating. Now, God bless you. Mutations are not good. I don't care if you're into the X-Men, believe it or not, mutations are bad. And a lot of evolutionists believe that mutations are the power that cause us to evolve. But what is really happening is that we're passing down DNA to each new generation, and that causes 100 to 200 new genetic mutations to accumulate. So in essence, you and your grandkids, you have 360 more genetic mutations than you. Your grandkids have that many more than you do. Now think about this. Your grandparents had 300 to 600 less genetic mutations than you. Now you see how that starts to add up? So genetic entropy is what we're experiencing today. There's no geneticist on the planet that denies this. We are acquiring mutations, and mutations are not good. There's actually 3 outcomes on mutations. Basically, it causes cells to go dormant, causes cells to basically self-destruct, or it causes rampant reproduction, uncontrolled reproduction of cells that form all kinds of growths and tumors. So genetic entropy is not a good thing. So let's go back to the mitochondrial DNA and the Y-chromosomal DNA, our Adam and Eve characters. So if we can look at the universe and see that it is decreasing in energy and complexity because of entropy, and we look at our genome and it's decreasing and becoming more filled with these terrible mutations, then what we can see is that as we go back generation after generation after generation after generation, the DNA actually becomes more pure. And so the reason why in Leviticus God said to not have relationship with close relatives is because the genetic mutations started to add up, and he knew that if you were having the same recessive genetic mutations coming from the same family members, then they would add up twice as fast and therefore start causing birth defects. And we've seen that in royal families across Europe, where inbreeding becomes a major problem. So that's why God says for us to not interbreed anymore, because our genome, God bless you, our genome is experiencing genetic entropy. All right, moving on. So how did the earth populate after Adam and Eve, as well as after the flood? Was it by incest? No, it was not, because it wasn't a law yet. And yes, siblings did have to marry, but it was because our genes were pure back then. Moving on, dinosaurs. How many people love dinosaurs? Isn't that great? When I was a kid, I wanted to be a paleontologist. I was so excited about paleontology. I thought it was awesome. And then every single rock show, fossil show that I went to, they started dumping all of this information on me that was counter to what I believed to be true. I had a little coffee mug. I use it for hot chocolate. It had a really cool Bible verse on it. And I'm going to read it to you in just a second. So the question that Pastor Jim sent me was, are dinosaurs in the Bible? So let's look it up. This was the verse on my coffee mug. Job 40:15 through 18. Look at Behemoth, which I made along with you, and which feeds on grass like an ox. What strength it has in its loins, what power in the muscles of its belly. Its tail sways like a cedar. The sinews of its thighs are close-knit. Its bones are tubes of bronze. Its limbs like rods of iron. This is not what was described in Job. This is actually a photograph of some artifacts that were untombed from King Tut's tomb. They came to Los Angeles. It was one of the largest exhibits of ancient Egypt culture outside of Egypt, and it was in my backyard, so I figured I would go. Anybody notice anything about these figurines? They're all handmade. Well, you could assume that because they're 3,000 years old. They're all made out of wood. They're all made out of a very specific type of wood, and it's called cedar. Now, Egypt doesn't have a lot of cedar trees, but there were some famous trees in a forest in Lebanon called the Cedars of Lebanon. I'm sure you're all familiar with it. And this is a drawing depicting these enormous trees. They were famous across the ancient world. They're large trees. Now, here is a picture of Lebanon. You can see it in the top middle there. It says Lebanon. That's where the forest was. And then down to the left, you see Egypt. And then the purple circle is where we believe the land of Uz, which is the region of Eden, which is where our good buddy Job lived. And this is where we pick up in that Bible verse. Look at the behemoth which I made along with you, and which feeds on grass like an ox. What strength it has in its loins, what power in the muscles of its belly. Its tail sways like a cedar. So do you think Job was familiar with cedar trees? The shipping had to go through his hometown. You had Lebanon up top. You have Egypt down below. There's really no way for the wood to get to Egypt without going through the land of Job. So Job was not confused with the size of a cedar tree. So let's look and see what other behemoths are around that are familiar. So this is a large animal. It's a behemoth in characteristics, I guess. But would you suggest that its tail is like a swaying cedar? I wouldn't. These guys are pretty big. But look at that tail. Yeah. So when it comes to large animals, there's really only one that comes to mind. It's a sauropod. A brontosaurus, a brachiosaurus. There's a skeleton. Paleontology wasn't around in Job's day. One of the first dinosaur bones we ever found and reassembled was in the 1700s. How would Job know, or the writer of Job know, what a sauropod looks like? So what is the motive behind this question? Well, evolution again. Here we are. The evolutionary worldview claims dinosaurs to have gone extinct 66 million years ago. So there's no way that Job could have been an eyewitness to a sauropod. Impossible, according to an evolutionary worldview. So just the suggestion of the book of Job referring to a dinosaur will cause ridicule to come upon you. You will be made fun of if you think that dinosaurs were in the Bible, according to scientists today. So, the Bible offers an eyewitness description of a creature that resembles a sauropod. The idea of a dinosaur and humans living at the same time flies in the face of evolution, but science embraces questions. Science is not opposed to questions. We're allowed to question science. So I have a question for science. Is there any other evidence that supports the idea of humans and dinosaurs coexisting? Is there any other evidence? The Nile crocodile, they did live a long time ago. They're in the fossil record. But I'm not sure that the Nile crocodile is exactly what he's talking about. So let's look for more evidence. So these are the native people of Utah. This is a carving. That looks very similar to a sauropod. This was drawn on a wall in a cave before Europeans even came to the Americas. These are the Dayak peoples of Borneo and Sumatra. You see the villagers hunting a large, terrible lizard-like creature. These are ecoburial stones of Peru. You can see that there's a triceratops at the bottom right. There's a sauropod on the left. These are drawings of dinosaurs. This is a rock carving at Ta Prohm near Angkor Wat, Cambodia. This is on a temple. What does that look like to you guys? Stegosaurus. Yeah. This is Chinese dragon art from the 12th century. This is the ancient Chinese zodiac. Now, whoever thought that we'd be teaching the zodiac in church? We're not really going to get into the religious ramifications of this. But this is a 12-symbol calendar of sorts that features the year of the rat, the year of the ox, the year of the tiger, the year of the rabbit, the year of the dragon. Now you might be saying, okay, Willie, that's a mythical creature, and also it's probably just taking the place of the year of the snake because it looks very serpent-like, but they've got the year of the snake too. They've got the year of the horse, the year of the goat, the year of the monkey, the year of the rooster, the year of the dog, and the year of the pig. None of these creatures on the zodiac are depicted as extraordinary or mythological. There's just the dragon right there in the middle. Now, of course, it wasn't called a dinosaur because we didn't invent the word dinosaur until recently, but dragon was the best word that they had to describe it. Now, there's tales of dragon slayers in many, many cultures. Ancient Greece, there's Apollo slaying a dragon. Ancient China, slaying a dragon. Medieval times, slaying a dragon. The dragon slayer is embedded in human culture. The book of Job suggests dinosaurs to have lived in recent times, yet do other writers. You see, we have this in our culture where we are describing these very dinosaur-like creatures, but yet is the book of Job the only eyewitness written down? Well, actually it isn't. The Travels of Marco Polo, book 2, chapter 49, concerning a further part of the province of Karahan. In this province are found snakes and great serpents of such vast size as to strike fear in those who see them. Some of them are 10 paces in length, and in bulk they are equal to a great cask. For the bigger ones are about 10 palms in girth. They have 2 forelegs near the head, but for the foot nothing but a claw, like the claw of a hawk or that of a lion. The head is very big, and the eyes are bigger than a great loaf of bread. The mouth is large enough to swallow a man whole, and is garnished with great teeth. Marco Polo. Now, Marco Polo is an ancient writer, and so is the book of Job is an ancient writing. But here is a current writing from a scientific journal. Soft tissues and vesicles and cellular preservation in the Tyrannosaurus rex. Now, Mary Schweitzer is an evolutionist. She does not believe that dinosaurs are young. But for some reason, she thought, why don't I crack open a dinosaur femur? So she took a T-Rex bone, cut it open, and guess what she found inside? Blood cells, soft tissues. Now, if a dinosaur bone is 66 million years and it's fossilized, then it's actually not supposed to be made up of any organic material whatsoever. See, the way that a fossil works is you have an animal buried quickly in mud, and then that animal decomposes, leaves a little animal-shaped cave underneath, and then water leaches down, and the minerals that are in the water fill up the cavity, and you've got a mineral replacement. It's basically a cast. There's not supposed to be organic material in something that is 66 million years old. So she found this, and it blew up the evolutionary community in a really bad way. People were mad at her. And she thought, well, what was I going to do? Lie about it? I'm a scientist. I have to write down the truth. But that was probably the only dinosaur bone that had any type of organic matter in it. No, actually it wasn't. So Science Direct, another one. This was from a Triceratops horn. And this guy was actually out here in Cal State Northridge. And he got fired because he posted his findings truthfully. They told him, we don't want any of your religion in this science department. And he's like, with all due respect, I don't believe red blood cells in a Triceratops horn has anything to do with religion. I don't even think they followed Jesus. Triceratops. Okay, moving on. Protein recovered from dinosaur eggs. You see, these are published in scientific journals, but they never make it to the mass media. Look at that image. There's a dinosaur and a man. Obviously, this is a computer-generated image, but what do you think is most plausible? With all the evidence that I just went over, maybe we have some eyewitnesses of sauropods. So are dinosaurs in the Bible? I can't prove it definitively, but a good scientist can look at the evidence and make the most reasonable and logical conclusion. So if you weigh the evidence, what is the most reasonable, logical conclusion? Well, I believe the Bible's true. Let's talk about cavemen. You guys ready? All right. Are you guys falling asleep? Are you with me? Is this exciting? Okay, cool. Let's talk about cavemen. All right, moving on. Oh, these are not real cavemen, by the way. It's like a diorama from a museum. Yeah, just to let you know. They didn't even have cameras back then. What about cavemen? Is there such a thing? What is the timing? It's a great question. There's so much in there to unpack. We'll try to do our best. So yes, there are cavemen. I already showed you this picture. Cavemen lived in caves and they drew on walls. Living in a cave is still possible today. Anybody like Airbnb? You can be a caveman today for only $1,400 per night. You can rent this luxury cave somewhere. Where is it? It's close to the Parthenon, I guess. I guess that must be in a foreign land, ancient Greece somewhere. So yeah, living in a cave doesn't necessarily mean that you are the missing link. God bless you. All right, so what is the motive behind the question of cavemen? Let's go back to our friend or me on a late night with Red Bull. Okay, moving on. Evolution is the problem. See, evolution claims humans to have evolved from a lower human-like species similar to what we think of as cavemen. That's why we're here. But there's two lines of evidence, and every good scientist looks at evidence and then makes a logical conclusion. And so does every good Christian, right? We're supposed to know the reasons for what we believe, so here are some reasons. So we have fossils to look at, and we have genetics to look at. So let's dive in. Lucy, the Australopithecus. This is the most famous missing link fossil ever. They claimed that this definitively showed evolution to be true, yet this fossil, I am under the impression, and maybe you could correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like there might be a few assumptions that somebody has to make in claiming that this is the missing link between our ancestors and humans. Yeah, it's less than 40% complete, and it is the most complete hominid fossil to date. Moving on. Littlefoot. Littlefoot is a famous missing link that everybody claims to be definitive proof. Well, the shaded in part is the only part of the fossil that has actually been recovered. The rest is a drawing, but one thing I'd like to point out is actually the whole thing is drawing. There is no real fossil in this image. And then this is another Australopithecus showing that we're finding these Lucy-like missing link characters all over the place. And so this one's extremely convincing to me. Not really. Okay, so there are two lines of evidence. The fossils for our missing links are pretty grim. So we're going to go ahead and cross out fossils because I know that the fossils exist. They're just not convincing, and there's just way too many assumptions. And science is not about assuming facts. Facts are facts, and assumptions are assumptions. So let's dive into genetics. You guys ready to do that? Okay, so fossils don't contain any DNA. They're not supposed to. They're old, okay? And most of these Australopithecus fossils that we find are so badly degraded that there's no DNA, even if they are younger. We can't find any DNA in these hominid fossils. But Neanderthal bones do contain DNA. So we need to talk about Neanderthals. So here is a human skull, and on the right is a Neanderthal skull. What does Neanderthal DNA tell us about human evolution? Well, genetics has shown that Neanderthals and humans had viable offspring together. Now, the reason why I say viable offspring is because you can have a horse and a donkey mate, and it creates a mule. Now, a mule is not a viable offspring because mules are sterile. They can't have their own offspring. So in order to get a mule every single time, you're going to have to go get a real horse and a real donkey to make a mule, because that mule can't reproduce. So when I say a viable offspring, what I'm saying is that an offspring that can have another offspring, that can have another offspring, that can have another offspring. Does that make sense? Okay, so genetics has shown that Neanderthals and humans have had viable offsprings together because they say that humans and Neanderthals have mated, and making you part caveman, meaning that they have sequenced DNA from Neanderthals and they have sequenced humans, and we have very similar DNA. And so they say that we have interbred in the distant past. Well, I'd like to talk about my good buddy Ernst Mayr. Unfortunately, I never met him. He died before I had a chance. But, very wise guy, he developed the BSC, which is called the biological species concept. And what it states is that species are groups of interbreeding natural populations that are reproductively isolated from other such groups. Let me break that down in layman's term for you. Only members of the same species can have viable offspring. So what does that say about the horse and the donkey? They're a different species because they can't have a viable offspring. Now the same thing is true about a horse and a cat. They can't even have a sterile offspring. So you have a demarcation between species, and one way to understand that demarcation is if they can have offspring or not. So the most widely accepted scientific understanding of species affirms the biblical truth of creatures reproducing after their own kind. So if humans and Neanderthals mated, making you part caveman and me part caveman, then the question we need to ask ourselves is, are Neanderthals really a different species? Neanderthals and humans interbreeding shows that they are the same species, especially if they had viable offspring. So is this a real picture? Is this human skull really next to a Neanderthal skull? Or are we talking about a human skull next to a human skull? See, I see this as different ethnic groups of human and human. When we look at the global population and we look at the variation between cranial measurements, we see a very similar representation between our Neanderthal bones that we have found and our human bones that we know for a fact are human bones. Now, if we look at this through an evolutionary worldview, we can make it look like anything. But if we look at it through a worldview alive today observing, testing, replicating, and verifying bone structure, facial features of ethnic groups. What do we see? Watch the screen. We see people that look pretty much like Neanderthals today. Let me go back. Go back. Different ethnic groups of humans. So when we find viable DNA in bones that are trying to be forced into an evolutionary worldview, and they say that we've been mating with them and having offspring together, then the question that I have to ask for you is, what about cavemen? Is there such a thing? And what's the timing? Well, no, there isn't such a thing, and I don't need to explain the timing because there isn't such a thing. Does that make sense? All right, moving on. What about giants? What about giants? Why are there none today? So here's the thing that I love to do when I'm on campus at UCLA. I like to question the question. See, if there's something in a question that's creating a truth claim or stating a fact, then you need to question that, because that is not a question, that's a fact that is trying to be claimed, forced in the question. So how about giants? That would be the question, boom. But then here it's saying, why are there none today? So they're making a claim that there are no giants today. And so since there's no giants today and there's giants in the Bible, then therefore the Bible must be false. That's the claim that they're trying to make. Well, 1 Samuel 17:4 talks about a giant. A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span. Now, a span is the average length between a grown man's thumb and pinky. It's actually 9 inches. And surprisingly, I measured my span, and my span is actually 9 inches. So I don't know if everybody's span is going to be the same, but that's what we're going on today. So his height was 6 cubits. Well, a cubit is twice a span, or a span is half a cubit. So if we've got 9 plus 9, that's 18. So 18 times 6, any math whizzes right here, divided by 12, that's 9 feet plus that 9-inch span. So Goliath was 9 feet, 9 inches. That's a pretty big dude. All right. But guess what? Robert Wadlow, tallest man that Guinness World Book of Records had ever recorded, his height was 8 feet 11 inches, just 1 inch shy of 9 feet. Sultan Kozan, 8 feet tall. He's actually the tallest man alive today, still alive. And this is Brock Brown. He's a teenager. He's the tallest teenager. He might become the tallest man someday, but look at this guy's head compared to his mom's head. It's insane. I mean, you find those bones somewhere, you're going to be like, oh my goodness, it's a Neanderthal or a giant. So the reason why Goliath was so special is because he was rare. You know, if everybody was a giant, then everybody would be a giant. We wouldn't think giants were giant. It's kind of like everybody in this room, we're all about the same size, right? Nobody's going to be an anomaly. Well, if one of these guys walked in here, we'd be like, oh, it's a giant. So giants are alive today. And so the idea that giants aren't around today, but they are in the Bible, and somehow that discounts the Bible, well, that logic is faulty. So how about giants? Why are there none today? I think we answered that question. Moving on. Flat Earth versus the other view. We're going to go quick because I only have 1 minute and 20 seconds. Is it really a flat Earth? The Bible never says. The Bible doesn't say it is a flat Earth. There are scriptures that if one wanted the earth to be flat, they could really drive that home. And there are scriptures that talk about the earth being a sphere, and you could really drive that home. Okay? The Bible doesn't say. But this guy, on December 13th, 1972, his name is Harrison Schmitt, took a very special photo. He was a crew member of Apollo 17. On his way to the moon, he looked out the window of the spacecraft and took the very first photo of the whole earth. Are you guys ready for it? Any flat earthers here today? I just ruined your entire paradigm. Dang it. That is the Horn of Africa. You can see the Red Sea. You can see the Sahara Desert. You can start to see some of the Congo. I mean, this is called the Blue Marble. It's a famous photograph. It was the first one ever taken in 1972, which seems extremely recent. Here's another one. He's planting a flag on the moon. You can still see the earth in the background. What a cool thing. We went to the moon and took pictures and stuff. I'm not really convinced about the evidence of the flat earth. That could be a completely different presentation. So is it really flat? I don't think so. One God, many questions. Answered questions build hope. Reasonable faith fuels outreach. Our fear loses. Confident hope that has been reasonably investigated, that gets stronger when tested, is what we get to have as Christians. See, the thing about it is that the Christian worldview is the most accurate worldview across the board. Internally, it has no contradictions in the Bible, and externally has no contradictions when it comes to evidence and how we can observe, test, and replicate things scientifically in our universe. See, the Christian worldview is the most comprehensive and non-contradictory worldview, and we have confident hope that has been reasonably investigated that gets stronger when tested. So we have one God, many questions. Do you guys have other unanswered questions? These are pretty deep. We're going to be doing a luncheon after the second service at 12:30. I would love to sit and talk about all kinds of other questions that you might have. So please come to the Q&A. If you can't make it, visit my website, readysetquestion.com. There's a lot of free stuff. You can download samples of my books. You can watch a free short film that I've made. I just want to bless you guys and give you some truth that might be kind of a cavity on your faith. So let me pray. Lord, thank you so much for the fact that you created everything and you are the truth, and you said the truth will set us free. And ultimately here, God, we are here to share your love and to bring people into the family, and to do that, Lord, boldly, and to not be inhibited by the fear that comes to rob us. So Lord, right now we just ask that you minister to our hearts and give us the strength and the boldness to share your love. In Jesus' name, amen.